things. I guess first we ought to just go around and have everybody introduce themselves. I'm Bob Burke, I'm president of KHF. And we'll start with Frank here.
Frank Rosine, I've lived in Kirkland for a little over 70 years.
Clarence Stone. That if you want to sign with all of us, that we will be sending off to him. Last we heard, my computer was out all day today, so I don't have an update from anybody, but last we heard is that he's slurring words and he's partially paralyzed on one side, but was resting, and the family had requested no visitors, but cards and that kind of thing are more than welcome.
He's at Cascade this time.
Pardon?
He's at Cascade this time.
Right. Okay. Yeah, Cascade. So we can put that as quick as I can. We'll put it in our web. Well, Dale, maybe we can put it on the website so that people can send things to whatever individuals. But incredible resource for our community. Also, last week we received 2 boxes about the size of this box down here from Betty McClintock Gowdy, who was graduated in class of 43. One of the boxes includes all of her Brownie Scout, or a lot of her Brownie Scout information: uniforms, badges, arts and crafts that they did at Camp Self, etc. The other box includes things which just delighted Louita's heart, and it's like the 6th grades that she was in at Rose Hill Elementary, with pictures of the kids in the front, and on the back are the names of everybody that's in the picture. Their 50th reunion picture from 43, again with a list of everybody who was in the picture. And that's so, we don't understand until you start to get these things how critical it is for putting information into the database of Past Perfect, how wonderful it is to have all that information that we can place there. If you notice in the library reserves that was just mailed, there was a picture of the students in the daycare at Lakeview Terrace with all the names of the kids, and the front cover was another picture from the Chuck Morgan City of Kirkland collection relative to the Leshlight coming to the dock. And there was history with that history is information which Louita has garnered from the East Side magazine that was published after World War II. And so that is forever now in our database of information. So that as people are doing research, they know what the source was, they have some summary of the information, and it's just the beginning. It's sure that we'll have a show and tell on that. Larry Miller, you brought a box tonight of stuff. You want to explain what's in there?
I don't know what's in it. Joyce Fowler dropped it off, said bring it to the meeting.
Just drop it on the front door.
You guys are the rackets. Marilyn looked in it, she might know what's in it.
Well, it has some things about the Redmond Golf Course being, I mean, that's fairly recent, you know, to us it seems, but when Redmond Golf Course was being taken out, and then when the Bonita Golf Course started, because it used to be a frog pond at the, and so it's about Bonita Bay, I guess. It's a lot of things about Bonita Bay.
Well, it's incredible the kind of information that's out there and how it adds to our understanding of the history of Kirkland. We recently bought a postcard or a photograph?
Postcard.
Huh? Of the sort of clubhouse and part of Bonita golf course. We tried to get one that somebody outbid us at the last instant, fun, but we're constantly looking to try to fill in collections of things. We had a call from David Aubrey and Ann Aubrey in the Everest neighborhood that they had come upon a collection of about 24 photographs of the housing and people that were living in the project during World War II. And they also had a picture of the, I think it was the Electrical Union baseball team from the shipyard. So, all those things just are little increments that add to our being able to show what the history of this community was over time.
One of my aunts just,
Huh?
one of my aunts just passed away. We received a little bit of pictures of our family that most of us had never seen. And she was a visitor. So she was. Oh, here she is in full uniform. We never even knew she did it.
Yeah, well, it's pretty incredible what we're finding, and yeah, so all those things are, everything that we receive now goes first into the past perfect data system and then gets put into the archives for protection. Anything else for the good of the order? Dale, Lynette?
I was just thinking about the box downstairs from Gowdy. Her report cards are in there. So if anybody wants to know about her, we've got it.
It's true. And the thing that struck me when I saw all of the report cards is one of the most delightful times that my kids had was when they saw one of their grandmother's report cards that said, "Talks too much." That absolutely made their day. They had the goods on grandma. So, the next program is, I don't have it offhand here. But anyway, so let's move ahead and we'll do this program.
Take it month to month. Before I introduce the guest speaker, let's do the raffle. The door prize is a gift certificate, $10 gift certificate to George's Place Restaurant downtown, Kirkland Avenue, which is a very nice of them to donate. They're one of our wonderful historic, can I say that? I don't mean an uncomplimentary, historic restaurants. Parents want to choose some?
If I draw my own, this ain't
Oh, you're
good.
in trouble. 043439. Oh, bad. There you go. Enjoy. Shannon isn't here tonight, she had to work, and she has been talking with our guest speaker, who is Sarah Fleming. So I don't know anything about you, you'll have to tell everyone yourself, I'm so sorry. Anyway, she's a genealogist, and I'm sure she'll welcome a lot of questions and interaction. Thank you. Thank you.
I have some handouts, and I'd like for this one to be passed out first. And then I have 3 more. I hope I have enough copies. I'll put these over here on the free table so you have access to them. Now, while that's being done, I'd like to get let me tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in Kentucky. I started doing research in 1970, and I've been doing it ever since, off and on. And I actually have too much stuff I want to tell you tonight, so I hope I don't keep you too long. But I want to get an idea of what levels of researchers we have in the audience tonight. How many of you have not started doing genealogical research yet? Oh, okay. And how many of you have done some? And how about a lot? Okay. So it looks like we have pretty experienced people here. I'll wait till, oh, and how many of you are using a genealogical program on your computer to do genealogy? And what are you using?
It's old, we call it reunion.
Okay. And what are you using?
I wrote my own.
You wrote your own. Oh my goodness. And what are you using?
I'm using sources from Ancestry.com.
Oh, okay. You're naming ones that I don't have on my handout at all. Does everybody have the first handout now? It's the notes that I'm going to go through, and there's 2 pages, front and back on one sheet of paper. So make sure you're with me on page 1. I've changed the order of what I'm going to talk about a little bit, so I'll try to make sure you know where I am. I made the copies, and then I changed my mind. There's still handouts. There's more handouts, yeah. Yeah, somebody passed out. There's 3 more handouts, yeah, right. I'm sorry. I'm passing out some paper family group records and some ancestry charts, also called pedigree charts, but I don't really recommend you do it on paper. When I started doing research in 1970, digital wasn't an option, and so I still have tons of stuff on paper, but you really should get a genealogy program and enter your stuff digitally. And if you don't go away with anything else tonight, I want to emphasize that you must always cite your sources. And I have a rule, since I'm transcribing things from paper into my program, I'm not allowed to enter any piece of data unless I cite the source right then. There's no, I'll do it tomorrow. I cite the source right then. You really need to cite your sources. And this book, which is on, there's a very short bibliography on the bottom of page 2 of the first handout. And under Mills is this book, which is called Evidence, Citation, and Analysis for the Family Historian. And this is the Bible for genealogy citations. But what I would say about citations, even though it's nice to have your citations in a standard format, what's really important is that somebody else could look at your research and go find the same source and verify it. Or even you could go back and find the same source again. You might want to look at it again. You might find some new surnames you wanted to work on, and you might want to go back and look at it again. I have some information that I don't know where I got it because I didn't know enough when I started. And I'll take questions anytime. Do you have a question?
What program do you suggest, like, for your computer?
Okay, on that midway down page 2, I have listed some genealogy programs. And I use Legacy. I used to use Family Tree Maker, but I switched to Legacy.
Okay.
And I understand some people have had problems with Family Tree Maker.
Yeah, that's how I got it.
Losing notes when they go to new releases and things like that. I just think Legacy does a better job with citations. But those are just some popular ones that I've listed here. And you can go to their websites and find out what they're all about. But Legacy is very popular in this area because it was developed by people who live in this area. You can read a lot of these bullets on my handout. I could spend a whole hour talking about just that one subject. So I have to go kind of fast, and I hope I don't lose anybody, and stop me to ask questions. But one of the first things you want to do when you start your research is try to find everybody. If you have any older relatives, you really need to talk to them, and you need to ask people if they have any family papers, do they have any journals, do they have photographs, and if the photographs aren't labeled, make sure that you don't write on them with a ballpoint pen like I did my grandmother's photographs, because I didn't know any better. I didn't know the ballpoint ink is acidic. And so you should either, it's okay to write with pencil on photographs, but you can also get archival pens to write on photographs. Don't use ballpoint pen. And family papers are wherever you find them. They can end up with half siblings, with step siblings. They may be scattered to four winds. And if you find a family Bible, make sure you ask, were there any loose papers in this Bible that you removed? Because people stick all kinds of things in family Bibles. Photographs, letters, obituaries, all kinds of things. And I had the experience in the early 70s, my grandmother had borrowed a Bible from somebody from me to see. And I had copied all the family information that was written in it. And then I was about to leave, and she said, oh, there are these old papers in the Bible, and I didn't think you'd want to see these. And I just about had a stroke when I saw what she had taken out of the Bible, and I almost didn't see. And I'm going to pass around, I'm going to tell you a little bit about this piece of paper, and then I'm going to pass it around. It's a very poor copy, but it's the best I could do with the technology that was available in a little town in Kentucky in the early 70s. And it's a pen and ink, kind of a Valentine, and it has a woman's name written around. It says Elizabeth Ann Travis. It says, it has a place name, Weakley County, Tennessee. It has a date of 1849, and it has a sentiment, a little verse written around the circle in the middle. Looks like this. And it's not signed, but because this woman married Lucius Pember, who was my ancestor, about 2 months after this was done, I believe that he probably gave this to her. So I'm going to pass this around. So this is the kind of thing that you might find in a family Bible, so be sure to ask. When you probably know a lot about world history, being historians. And historians usually say that you should interview, and if you have any elderly relatives, don't wait. I mean, hurry up and do it while they're still around. Historians will say that you should interview people one at a time, and I don't disagree with that. But what I found was my father and two of his older sisters were alive when I started doing research. And I did interview them individually, but I also found it was interesting to interview them as a group because they would feed off of each other. Somebody would say something that triggered memories in the others. And I heard some wonderful stories that way. And you can use things to trigger memories in people. Like show them old postcards, show them old pictures. One of the best gifts I ever gave my father was a reprint of the 1902 Sears catalog. He grew up on a farm. A lot of stuff they had when he was growing up came from Sears. And he and his sisters had more fun looking at this catalog. And it triggered stories. They found their mother's bedroom furniture. They found their papa's pocket watch. They found their mother's buggy. And then they said, oh yes, so the buggy came in a wooden crate. And then we built chicken coops with the wood. So I heard these wonderful stories, all triggered by this reprint of a 1902 Sears catalog that I think I paid $2 for. And it was wonderful. It triggered all kinds of memories that I wouldn't have heard otherwise. So use objects like that. You already know about postcards because that's been mentioned tonight. I found some wonderful postcards of the town where I grew up, which is Mayfield, Kentucky, a little town. And I found some postcards on eBay from 1908, which is the year my mother was born. And even though she lived in the county on a farm, I know what the county seat, Court Square, looked like in 1908, the year my mother was born. while we're talking about relatives, I want you to look at this relationship chart that was passed out. People get tangled up trying to figure out how they're related to each other, and this is just kind of an aid to help you with that. And the way this works is, you know, you wonder, are you second cousins, or are you second cousins once removed, or whatever. The way this works is you determine a common ancestor for you and the other person. Then you find one of the people along the top row, the other person along the left column. And so let's say that each of you is 2 generations removed from the common ancestor. And I apologize for this, but this is a really old chart. It's only got male nouns on it. But so let's say you're 2 generations removed from a common ancestor. So you find the 2 on the row, and you find the 2 on the column, and where they intersect, that tells you how you're related. So if you're both 2 generations removed from a common ancestor, you're first cousins. So let's say one of you is 3 generations removed from a common ancestor, and the other one is 2. So if you find 3 on, it doesn't matter whether you do it on the row or the column, you're going to get the same answer. So let's say you find 3 on one of them and 2 on the other one, and where they intersect, it says first cousin 1 generation removed. Or it's usually just said once removed. So this is just kind of a fun thing to have to help you untangle how you're related to these. Have most of you done some census research? I noticed that on your website is an aid for helping use Heritage Quest to do the census, which is, I'll talk more about Heritage Quest in a little bit. But you're lucky because so much census is online these days. When I started, I had to crank the microphone. That was the only thing. This sounds like my father's story, having to walk 5 miles to school and take his shoes off to wade through the creek. But it really was tedious. I had to crank the microphone. And fortunately, I lived in the D.C. area and was able to go down to the National Archives. But I there's some caveats about the online censuses. You need to be really creative when you're searching, and just because you don't find somebody doesn't mean they're not there. The people who did the indexes were not professional genealogists. They were not experts in reading the old handwriting. They probably were being paid minimum wage, and they might not have even been native speakers. So you need to be creative when you're searching the census. Also, people really got missed. Families got missed. Some people were counted twice. There's a lot of phonetic spelling because when people were illiterate, they didn't know how their names were spelled. So there's a lot of phonetic spelling. And also, think about who might have given the information. If the family wasn't at home, a neighbor might have given the information. Or if only children were home, a child might have given the information. So you need to keep that in mind. I can't find my mother's family in the 1920 census. She told me who all the neighbors were. I can find all the neighbors. I can't find her family. So I think they really were missed. You probably know that the publicly available censuses are from 1790 to 1930. The 1890 census was mostly burned. And the 1850 census was the first one that showed everybody in the household. And then as time went on, they showed more and more information. It got better. And I just want to mention that there are some censuses besides the population censuses. There are some mortality schedules and some agricultural schedules for some years. I don't think they have them at the regional archives here, but that's something else to keep in mind. It can be really interesting. Also, I recommend that you take classes, that you get as much education as you can. I didn't take a class I've been doing research for a couple of years before I took a class, and I made a lot of mistakes, like writing on pictures with ball. And I made a lot of other mistakes too, and I wasn't as careful about my source citations as I should have been. I noticed that BCC is having a class called Genealogy 101, which is starting May 24th for 4 Thursday nights. I don't know the instructor, so I can't comment on that, but it's probably a good class. The Seattle Genealogical Society has seminars twice a year. On November the 10th, from 9 to 5, there's going to be a family history expo at the Redmond Mormon Church, and it's totally free. And I've been to some in the past years, they're really good. And it's open to everybody, and they don't proselytize. So I recommend that to you on November the 10th.
That's not the one that's in Bellevue, your library is in Bellevue?
No, it's at the Redmond Mormon Church.
It's in Redmond.
Redmond, yeah, on November the 10th.
They have a big library system there in that building.
Oh, yeah, I'll talk about that in the next show. The National Genealogical Society has a home study course that you can take. And I want to talk just a minute about a class that's offered at the University of Washington. It's a certificate class called Genealogy and Family History. It's a 3-quarter class. It's a big commitment of time. I took it about 3 years ago. It's a wonderful class, and it's a really unique opportunity that we have in this area. There are only 1 or 2 other programs like it in the whole country. And it's taught by a historian and a genealogist. Lorraine McConaughey, you probably know her. She was the historian when I took the class. Somebody else she got too busy. Somebody else is doing it now. But I have some brochures about the class if anybody's interested. It's not cheap, and like I said, it's 3 10-week quarters, but it's a wonderful class. Does anybody here work for Boeing? Well, if you know anybody who works for Boeing, they will pay for this class, even though it has nothing to do with your job description. They will pay for it. And one of the things that was really wonderful about the class was it gave you complete access to all the UW libraries. It gave you access to some wonderful databases that they subscribe to. And the 3rd quarter, you write a paper. Most people write a paper on some part of their family, which is what I did. But you don't have to. One person in my class wrote a history of the church. And what we learned was to augment our family history with history and social history. So it was a really good class.
Which class was that?
It's the one at UW. It's called Genealogy and Family History. It's a certificate class, and I have brochures about it.
That's the one Boeing pays for?
Yeah, they will pay for it. Yeah, what?
A friend of mine is taking it, and she says it's outstanding.
Yeah, so think about it. And also, you should read a lot of how-to books. General ones, and on the bibliography on the bottom of the 2nd page, I have listed there Greenwood is the first entry there. And it's a good how-to book that you can just sit down and read. We use that as a text in the UW class. The bottom entry on the handout is not a book you want to sit down and read. It's a reference book. It's a great big fat book. And the other book that I mentioned there, the Sturdyman book, we also use that in the class that you have. I think when I was talking about the citations, I forgot to show you, there's also this quick reference card that tells you how to cite online historical resources. So both of these things are available, that and this book. Okay, so I've gone through some of the things you should do early on, and then now I'm at the head of all some other resources and tools. There are lots of published indexes, abstracts, and transcriptions. They will save you a lot of time, but you should always look at the original records. These books were done by human beings. They might have made mistakes, they might have missed things. Just because you don't find somebody in one of these books doesn't mean they're not in the records. But they can save you a lot of time if you find some for records that you're interested in. Published family histories and typescripts. Always question, analyze. If they don't cite their sources, you need to prove everything that they said. County histories. I have an example here of a county history, the type that genealogists call mud books. And the reason we call them mud books, there's history in the front, but in the back are bios of people in the county who pay to have their picture, hence mud books, and their bio put in these books. So just remember, these people pay to have this put in. So it's going to make them look good. I don't have any ancestors in this book, but I do have a cousin, and there's useful genealogical information in his bio. And he was a photographer in a little town in Kentucky, and he also paid for an ad. He called it Fleming's Art Gallery. It was a photography studio. So you'll find a lot of these. This is a reprint of a book that was done in 1894, and it's a reprint. You'll find a lot of reprints like this.
Could you get one of those books from the county library?
The question is, could you get one of these books from the county library? Probably. Probably they might have things like this. And another thing is that a lot of old books like that are not under copyright protection anymore. A lot of them are being republished on CDs rather than on paper. So sometimes you can find a CD of one of these really old books.
Where would you start for the CD or the book?
I would Google for the book and just see what happens. And the question was, where would you find these books? Yes.
A lot of them are Heritage Quest as well, the publication.
Right, yeah. I'm going to talk about Heritage Quest in a minute, but they have 20,000 scanned books, so there are lots of old books on Heritage Quest, which you can get to from home through the King County Library website. You probably know the censuses were done every 10 years. And you can use tax records, city directories. I noticed you have some phone directories, some old phone directories on your website. You can use those kinds of records to fill in between the 10-year intervals. And even if the census man missed your family, you can be sure that the tax man didn't. And in Kentucky, you didn't have to even own any land to be on the tax list. If you owned one mule, you were on the tax list. So just about everybody's on the tax list. And you're going to hear a lot tonight about where I was born in Kentucky. Graves County, Kentucky, the county seat's Mayfield. Graves County, Kentucky was established in 1824, so the first census wasn't until 1830. But those tax records have survived, and I can see when my people came into that county before the 1830 census. You can use tax records to give you an idea when people either moved away from an area or when they died. Tax records are wonderful, and I only know about Kentucky and Virginia tax records, but you need to learn in the how-to books on whatever state or that you're interested in should tell you about tax records in that state, what kind of tax records are available. And sometimes things like gold watches and clocks were taxed, so that gives you an idea of the social status of people. So they can be really interesting. Court records, of course, deeds, probates, wills, marriages. Sad story. The courthouse in Mayfield, Kentucky, Graves County, Kentucky, was burned in 1887. I had some lines that were in that county for 50 or 60 years before the fire. So that really complicates research in those counties. But I mentioned that the tax records were available. That was because a copy was sent to the state. So does anybody trying to do research in a county or a courthouse burned? Yes? Okay. Well, don't despair. There might be records like this that were at the state level. So, of course, I said it was a copy that was sent to the state. And anytime you copy anything, errors probably creep in. So keep that in mind. But it's wonderful that yes, question?
How are you going to find the tax records? How did you find them? Did you contact the state itself? Did you have a site?
Yes. There's a wonderful man who lives in Graves County, Kentucky, who has published a whole bunch of things. And he published some of the early tax records, and that's where I first found them. But they've been microfilmed, and they're available from Salt Lake. But like I said, the how-to books on the state would tell you what's available. And I'm going to talk about the Family History Library in Salt Lake in a minute, but they have lots of things like that on microfilm.
In Michigan, from 1890, you can get no records.
Oh, really?
Census.
Oh, yeah, most of the 1890 censuses were burned. So
That's your tax records made?
I don't know about Michigan. I know that there's some really neat tax records in Kentucky and Virginia, and I haven't researched tax records anywhere else. But it's something to be aware of and to look for.
I had heard that there's a library here in Sand Point that has a lot of
Yeah.
historical census data, et cetera.
Oh, really?
It's the federal archives.
It's the National
What's it
Archives.
called?
Oh, the National Art. Oh, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. A branch of the National Archives. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Vital records, cemetery, funeral home records. My mother was born in 1908, and Kentucky didn't start keeping vital records on a regular basis until 1911, so she didn't have a birth certificate. And I can remember going with my mother and my grandmother to the courthouse to apply for what's called a delayed birth certificate. A lot of people filed for, in the 20th century, filed for delayed birth certificates. Do you know what the impetus was for filing for? Why do people need to prove their birth date? Social Security. Yes, exactly, Social Security. So you might find a lot of delayed birth certificates.
Sarah?
Yes.
Just for the interest, and my mother was born in Chicago in 1906, a big city. No birth certificate, no birth records. It was a home birth, and that occurred so many times.
Yeah.
That was my case right in Kirkland.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you might not find a Bible, look for Bibles, look for church records, Christina's widow. And actually, the next thing on my list is church records, and unfortunately, a lot of rural church records where my parents grew up and just didn't survive. I don't know what happened to them. But church records can be wonderful if you can find them. And they're wherever you find them too. They might still be in a local church, they might be in a denominational archive somewhere. You just have to read the how-to books on the area that you're researching to find out where the church records are. Military pension records can be wonderful. If a person, let's say a Revolutionary War pension file, the person couldn't prove, they had no piece of paper that said they served in the Revolution. The widow applied for a pension, she had no proof she was married to the man. The file will be full of affidavits trying to prove that whatever they were saying was true, and they can be full of genealogical data. Sometimes people were so desperate to get the pension, they even sent a page in from the family record from their files. So that can be wonderful. They have microfilm at the National Archives branch at Sandpoint. They have all the census records, and they also have the Revolutionary War pensions, what's called the selected files, which is not the whole file. It's the part of, it's like 10 or 12 pages that somebody being reported. There might be actual more things in the file. And the National Archives is, you know, had budget cuts like most federal organizations, and they're about to raise their prices to send off for copies to some exorbitant rate, especially for Civil War pension files can be really huge. And they're going to start charging an ornamental aid for these copies, which is too bad. So there's campaigns right now to reach your congressman to say, do something about this. Newspapers are much more than births, deaths, marriages. I could spend a whole hour talking about newspapers because my courthouse is burned. I use newspapers a lot. And I'm going to pass around one of the first things that I found in a 1893 newspaper. It was a little, they put everything in the old small town newspapers. It's an article that says, John J. Fleming, who was one of my fraternal great-grandfathers, had lost his mind and was going to be committed to the state mental hospital. And, I mean, this kind of thing really got put in the paper. And I found that, yeah, I found his commitment papers. I found that he didn't die there. He was actually released after about 3 months, and he lived for another 4 years. And there are people actually alive who knew this, and they hadn't withheld the information from me. They just hadn't remembered to tell me. So this is another example where I found something doing my research that triggered something, and they told me, they gave me a lot of information. They told me he didn't die there. And I was able to actually confirm that the institution still exists, and I was able to actually confirm 1893 discharge for him. Okay, next thing I'm going to talk about is maps, land ownership maps, and I'm going to, this is a list of land ownership maps that they have at the Library of Congress. Now this is all online these days, but the cover on this will give you an idea of what land ownership map, how many of you have ever seen a land ownership map? Okay, it's actually got people's names. And so you can see who the neighbors were. And I've got 1880 land ownership map for Grace County, Kentucky, a reprint of it. And this is, you can find this out online, but this is a publication, a really old publication, that shows which ones they have at the Library of Congress. And I just want to say one other thing about the Library of Congress. You've probably heard, have you heard that the Library of Congress has everything ever printed in the United States? You ever heard that? Well, it's not true. They have an awful lot of stuff, but they don't have, for example, this 1880 atlas, land ownership atlas on Grace County. They have a lot of them, but they don't have that one. And there's a lot of things they don't have. There's a company called Arphax, A-R-P-H-A-X, that is publishing, and if you just go to arphax.com, you can find their website. They're publishing plat maps with the original owners for all of the public land states. A-R-P-H-A-X. Does everybody know what I mean by public land states? No. The old states, the original colonies, and several of the other states east of the Mississippi River, Kentucky and Tennessee, and I'm not sure exactly what all it includes, were laid out in meets and bounds. The land was measured in meets and bounds. The western states were laid out in grids called townships, and the United States government sold those. That's why they're called public land states. All those states have, they're actually online records too from, let's see, what government agency is that has I can't remember right now. Anyhow, these people this company is printing these plat maps for the original owners for these public lands, and they're pretty neat. I don't have any, my family, my direct lines all ended up in 2 counties in western Kentucky and never moved. Collateral lines went to Texas and other places, but my direct lines just stayed right there. So I don't do any, I just go, start with Kentucky and go back to Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia. Immigration and naturalization records are some more sources. And I want to say a little bit about collateral lines. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back to maps for just a minute. I missed talking about Sanborn fire insurance maps, and I'm going to pass around an example of the Sanborn fire insurance map. They're useful for doing research in towns and cities. And this isn't, and the town didn't have to be very big. This is from Mayfield, Kentucky. It shows the house where I was born and our garage and the alley behind our house. It was done in 1947. I was 5 years old then. And it shows, I've marked on here where the neighborhood grocery was, and there was a church on the corner. So if you know where your ancestor lived in town or city, you can find some of these Sanborn maps. And they're online, but I think they're by subscription. I got to these from the Kentucky Historical Society. But they give you an idea of what the neighborhood's like, what churches were there, what businesses were there, what kind of what schools were in the area. So they give you an idea of what the neighborhood was like where your ancestor lived. Okay, now I'm going to talk about collateral lines. A lot of people, especially when they start out, say, oh, I'm only interested in searching my ancestors. I don't care about their brother. That's what collateral lines are, the siblings of your ancestors. But you will have better luck if you research the collateral lines too. And let me just give you an example of something that researching a collateral line might find for you. Let's say you had an ancestor who died before they were keeping vital records in the area. But they had a sibling who lived long enough to have a death certificate. That death certificate might tell you their mother's maiden name. So don't discount these collateral relatives. I'm also going to pass around a very poor copy of a postcard from 1888 that it was written by John J. Fleming, who was my ancestor who was committed to the state mental hospital before he was committed. And he wrote it to a brother-in-law saying that the mother-in-law had died. So he wrote it to Hiram Woods saying their mother died, and we didn't have time to let you know about it. And there's also some other information in this postcard. I got this postcard from a very distant cousin who lives in California, who got it from somebody who lives in Kentucky that I had never found. But so this postcard, even though it was written by my ancestor, was sent to somebody who was a collateral relative. And I found it many years later. And there were several things exciting about this. I knew this man was literate, but this is the only evidence I have of anything that he wrote. So the grammar's not perfect, but it's not bad. And I have a signature. So this was really neat. And because this is a postcard that was sent outside the immediate family, collateral research helped find this for it. It's useful to build a timeline, to lay a historical timeline on your ancestors' life, so that you know what's going on in the world during the time that they were living. You should join genealogical societies in the area where you, and historical societies in the area where you want to do research, so that you get their publications. And DNA is a big genealogy thing these days. The first two websites, is everybody with me, am I going too fast, are you on the DNA bullet? The first two websites there are commercial websites. They have a lot of surname studies, surname databases on those sites. The third one is something called the Sorensen Molecular Genealogy Foundation. And it would take too long if I tried to explain to you what it is. It's a free, it's a nonprofit site. Go to the website and read what they're trying to do. It's interesting. Mr. Sorensen is a very rich man who's footing the bill for this. So go read about that. And then I want to talk about serendipity. I know of at least 3 books that have been written on serendipity and genealogy. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of my own research. I was researching in Fairfax County, Virginia library years ago. And I had been looking at microfilm, and I was tired of looking at microfilm. And I decided I would browse the bookshelves. And I was looking through Kentucky books, and I found a book called, actually a typescript, called Liggins and Their Kin in Grace County, Kentucky. Well, as far as I knew, I was not interested in Liggins, but there's so little published on Grace County, Kentucky, that I'm going to read anything that's published on Grace County, Kentucky. And so I found that there were 4 surnames treated in this book, four sections. And one of the, I didn't think I was interested in any of these surnames. But when I was looking through the section on the Edens, E-D-E-N-S surname, out popped my Benjamin is Sabrina Rhodes. And that's how I found out that Sabrina had been in Edens. So these people migrated from North Carolina to Tennessee to Kentucky. And the woman who wrote this typescript lived in Texas, and I found this in a library in Virginia. And the Grace County, Kentucky Library doesn't have a copy of this transcript. I have seen it in a couple of other libraries since then, but it's not really widespread. Another experience I had was a class I took on Virginia research when I lived in Fairfax County, Virginia. And there were maybe 15 people in the class, and there was another woman in the class who was researching the same line I was in Virginia. She'd grown up in Missouri, I'd grown up in Kentucky, and we met in a class in Virginia. It happens a lot. You'd be surprised how much it happens. Has anybody had any experiences like that?
I had a tremendous one. I went down to I go to the Virginia, I'll let you know, I can remember. But several years ago, before the meeting starts at the Belgian Library,
Yeah.
they got a bunch of old books that they're discarding.
Yeah, right.
And there was a beautiful book there on clocks, antique clocks. And, you know, so I bought it and started to come through it for the meetings. It was kind of boring.
Yeah.
And I traced my mother's family back to Lyon, France, to about 1490. And the person there was Pierre Bartram. In the back of the clock book, Pierre Bartram, clockmaker, Lyon, France, came from Geneva, Switzerland.
Oh, neat. Yeah.
Why do you buy the book? You know, that was just serendipity.
Yeah, almost like you're just drawn to these things. I mean, you know, you don't know why you're doing it, but it turns out. I mean, it's amazing. Then, the last bullet I had under that heading is conferences and cruises. Next month I'm going to a National Geological Society conference in Richmond, Virginia. Does everybody know this is the 400th anniversary of the settlement of Jamestown? That's why the conference is in Richmond this year, and there's going to be lots of that Jamestown and it's a conference. I'm excited about that. And also, there are genealogy cruises. I did one a couple of weeks ago, and all of the ones I know about are sponsored by the genealogy software companies like Legacy and the company that does master genealogists. Okay, any questions up to this point? I would just get the idea that there are lots of resources besides the obvious ones, and we should really beat bushes trying to find records. Okay, I'm going to talk, yes.
I could
from this field, the library, because we wanted to research our other side in Chicago, and they had own factories in that back there.
Yeah.
So we just went online to ask the library
Yeah.
at Chicago Main Library. And they sent us all kinds of articles like the newspaper of our relatives.
Oh, wonderful.
Usually they'll charge maybe 10 cents
Yeah,
each, but they
right.
send it free. So-
Yeah. Yeah, they're wonderful people out there who help you with
So they asked the librarian, is it good?
Yeah, do y'all know that Ask the Librarian? I mean, the King County Library System has it, a lot of library systems have that.
What's it called?
Ask the Librarian, online, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna talk, we have wonderful local resources here. So I'm just gonna go through some of those. The Eastside Genealogical Society meets at the Bellevue Library monthly. And they also provide free help at the library on Tuesdays from 7 to 9 p.m. and on Wednesdays from 1 to 3 p.m. And all this information, their meeting and everything is on the website. I can go there. The King County Library System has genealogy collections in Bellevue and in Auburn, but you don't have to go to those libraries to use the books. You can go to whatever branch library you use. Go to the reference librarian and ask to have the books sent to your library, and they will call you when it comes in. You have to use it, of course, in the library if it's a reference book, but you can do that. From the King County Library website, from home, you can get to Heritage Quest. Heritage Quest has census. It has a lot of digitized books. But I want to call your attention to a database called PERSI, P-E-R-S-I. It stands for Periodical Source Index. And it is an index to about 2 million articles in 6,500 genealogy and local history publications. Now, I mean, think about all these little societies all over the country who are publishing a lot of them serialize data in their publications, and this stuff is just buried, hidden away. This is an index into those publications. And about halfway down on page 2 of your handout is under the online sources. I think it's about the 7th bullet is the Allen County Public Library. The reason I want to mention that now is that they are actually the creators of PERSI, and they have the largest collection of genealogical and local history periodicals in the world. And if you find something in this PERSI index that you want a copy of, you can request it from them. It can cost money, but you can request it from them. So that's a really good thing to know. If you're at a King County library, you can also get to Ancestry, which has lots of census. It has tons of other stuff. So just go out there and explore and see what's out there. We mentioned earlier the Salt Lake Library, which is wonderful. But you don't have to go there to use that library. You can go to the local family history centers. There are several in this area. There's one in Kirkland. I'm not sure where it is. And there's one in Bellevue. And you can go to this website I've listed here. There are some databases you can search on that website, but you can get to the Salt Lake Library catalog on that website. If you find microfilm you want to look at, you can go to one of the local libraries, the family history centers, and request this microfilm be sent from Salt Lake to that library. They charge you $5.50 a roll, and they'll let you know when it comes in. And all of the family history centers, at least I know in Bellevue, and I assume they all do, have some permanent collection of microfilm. For example, in Bellevue, they have a lot of Irish microfilm. So you be sure to ask if they have any permanent microfilm, because if they have something you want to see and you don't have for it. Also, if other patrons have requested something on the same area that you're doing research in, you might get lucky and you might have it, and if that person's not using it, you could use it while you were there. There's also, we mentioned earlier, there is a branch of the National Archives on Sandpoint, and they have, as I mentioned, census records and Revolutionary War pension on microfilm. They also have records for the Pacific Northwest, and not everything's microfilm. The Seattle Genealogical Society Library is right across the street from the archive on Sandpoint Way, and what I want to tell you about them is they have the largest collection of genealogical CDs in the area. The Seattle Genealogical Society Library on the Sandpoint Way, right across from the National Archives. The Suzzallo Library at UW has a wonderful collection of historical journals. You know, like scholarly journals, they're wonderful. And I've already mentioned the UW Genealogy and Local History, Family History Certificate class. The Fisk Genealogical Society, Genealogical Foundation has a library in Seattle. The Tacoma Public Library has a genealogy collection. And the Puget Sound Regional Archives at BCC, Bellevue Community College, has materials on King, Kitsap, and Pierce counties. So all of you, I know a lot of you were born here, so that's probably a place that you want to go research. Okay, now I want to talk about online resources. And there's two things I want you to take away from tonight. Cite your sources, and the other one is the internet is not the be-all and the end-all of research. Everything's not on the internet. The internet is a tool. It's not the end of research. And any family data that you find out there, you should be suspicious of. You should analyze it. If people don't cite their sources, you should question it. And unfortunately, when bad information gets put on the internet, it gets perpetuated and it stays forever. So you should be analytical about anything you find out there. And every website, you should read the help files so that you understand what's on the website and how to search it. Because you will have the best results if you actually take time to read through the help files. I'm not going to talk about in detail about all of these websites, but there are a few I want to touch on. Cindy's list is a list of genealogy sites, about 250,000 links. So that's a good place to start. It is a pointer to lots of other useful websites. Roots Web and US Gen Web, I could talk about all night. Go out there and just see what's out there. There's wonderful stuff out there. Like US Gen Web has a site for every state and most counties in the states. And it's manned by volunteers, so what you find is not the same. It's just whatever people have volunteered to do. I've already mentioned the Allen County Public Library. Have any of you ever looked at the American Memory Collection on the Library of Congress website? You should go look at it and make sure you have plenty of time when you do, because you're going to get hooked on it. The American Memory Collection, you can get to it from this main menu, that the home page that I've listed here. And there's something that says American Memory Collection that you can click on. They have tons of digitized historic maps, photographs, documents, lots of things. It's just a smidgen of what they have at the Library of Congress, but it's a lot of stuff and it's wonderful. When you click on American Memory, it's going to give you a whole menu of subcategories under that. And be sure to read how to search. If you search the whole collection, you get different results than if you search each subhead. But there is wonderful stuff out there. But make sure you have plenty of time when you go to look, because you're going to want to spend The National Archives website is not friendly. It's, the screens are too busy, and for example, the home page and lots of the other pages are too long, so you have to scroll. So make sure you always look at that scroll bar on the right of your screen and see if there's more. You miss a lot of good stuff if you don't scroll. And you really need to read the help files on this site, because searching is, you won't have good luck searching if you don't. They have some things like World War II enlistment records, not the service records, but the enlistment records. I found my uncle. They have World War II prisoner of war records. I found a man that I knew had been in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. They have a lot of interesting stuff, but it's not as neat as the Library of Congress website. And you should explore the state and local archives and libraries websites. Some of them are beginning to digitize records, like the Library of Congress. The Library of Virginia has digitized a lot of records. And university presses have their publications listed online, and they're a good source for finding histories. You know, in-print histories. But they do reprints too, so you might find things there. Now, I want to talk about the role of history and genealogy. I didn't enjoy studying history when I was in school. Did anybody else feel that way?
Can't hear you, what?
I didn't enjoy studying history when I was in school. Did anybody else feel that way? I just never had a history teacher that made it interesting for me. But I hadn't been doing genealogical research very long before I realized that names, dates, and places weren't very interesting. You need to you can use history to put flesh on the bones, to get a sense of what it was like to live in a time and place, to put yourself in your ancestors' shoes. You need to understand what were the reasons for migration, what was the push, and what was the pull. Can you think of some reasons why people migrated? Land. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Didn't pay their bills.
Oh. Anybody got other reasons?
To leave the pollution of the region.
I'm sorry?
To leave the pollution behind of the polluted streams and factories and the.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Sometimes taxes were high. They moved to get away from high taxes. And the lure, somebody's already said, was land. What were the other reasons why they might be lured to a particular place?
Gold rush.
Yeah, gold rush.
Their relatives went before.
Exactly. The relatives went and sent back letters saying, it's great here, you ought to come.
The railroads.
Yeah, right. So it's helpful to understand why people left where they did and why they went to where they did. You also need to know the events: wars, epidemics, financial crises, things that could have affected people's lives. Was there a war that somebody might have served in? There was a cholera epidemic, for example, in this country in the 1830s. Somebody died at a time when there was an epidemic. That might be what they died of. Now, can you think of some sources other than history books that could help you understand your ancestors' lives? Newspapers, yes.
I know the company who's digging up our houses.
What?
There's a company that's digging up
Oh,
our
how
houses.
is it digging up houses? That's interesting.
They're finding all sorts of.
Yeah. What about periodicals? And unpublished master's theses. And even if your ancestor didn't leave any journals, somebody in that area at the same time might have written a journal, which would give you a glimpse into what life was like in that area. So just because you don't find a journal written by your ancestor doesn't mean you shouldn't read what you maybe can't find. And you can find a lot of these kinds of things online these days. I'm going to just quickly, I'm taking too much time, sorry. I'm going to just quickly tell you a little bit about the paper that I wrote for the class at the UW. I wrote about my Rhodes family, Joseph Rhodes and his parents, Benjamin and Sabrina, and her family, the Edens, which I found from that transcript. And what I knew about them was they migrated from North Carolina about 1807 to Tennessee, where they stayed about 3 years, and then they moved to Muhlenberg County, Kentucky.
Where did they come from in the beginning?
Onslow County, I don't know. I don't know past Onslow County, North Carolina. That's research I haven't done yet. The research for this paper covered the period from about 1800 to 1860, and I haven't tried to go back further than that yet. And then while they were learning Muhlenberg County, if you can visualize what a map of Kentucky looks like, it's kind of fat north to south in the middle, and then it gets skinny in the western part. The extreme western part of the state was not part of the original state. It was purchased from the Chickasaw Indians in 1818. And Andrew Jackson was involved in the negotiations. That land is called the Jackson Purchase, and that's the area where Graves County is. So while they were living in Muhlenberg County, where they moved about 1810, this land was bought from the Chickasaw Indians. But Kentucky didn't start selling the land until about 1822. And two of Sabrina Eden's Rhodes brothers show up on the very first tax list in Jackson Purchase. So they were there in 1822. Benjamin and Sabrina don't show up there until 1827. And what I believe happened is that her father who died in 1819, I can find his estate records in the court papers. But I think they stayed in Muhlenberg County until her mother died, is what I think. And then they joined her brothers in western Kentucky, in Graves County, Kentucky. The Edens were reasonably prosperous for that day. I can find lots of court records for them. They owned land, and Sabrina's father owned land in Onslow County. He owned land in Muhlenberg County. But poor Benjamin, the first evidence that I can find that he ever owned any land was when he bought land in 1831 in Graves County, Kentucky. He was already 66 at that point in time. And he and his son Joseph both bought land on the same day for 25 cents an acre. It was good land. Benjamin got a Revolutionary War pension. Sabrina got a widow's pension, and she got a warrant for 160 acres, which she sold. And interestingly, she didn't get her pension until 1857, a Revolutionary War pension. She got in 1857, which sounds really late, but she was 20 years younger than Benjamin. And different laws got passed that regulated who was eligible for pensions, and there was a law passed in 1853 that made her eligible for a pension. Before that, she hadn't been eligible because she hadn't been married to him when he was actually in the service. So this leads to all kinds of questions. Why did they leave Onslow County? Why did they go to Tennessee, and why did they only stay there 3 years? And why did they go to Muhlenberg County? And why? It's obvious why they went to Graves County, because it was new land, it was cheap land, it was good land. What was it like to live in all these places, and what education was available for the children? And what events were going on in the world and in the state, in that area, that would have affected their lives? So I'm just going to quickly tell you some of the resources that I used. So wonderful, you can find things online these days. I found the history of Onslow County, North Carolina, a current history, excuse me, that was published by the North Carolina State Archives. And it told me that they were part of a mass migration from North Carolina. And the reasons that this book gave for the mass migration were things like overcrowding, high prices, high taxes, and soil exhaustion. I don't know where they went in Tennessee, and I don't know why they only stayed there 3 years. But I think the land was better in Muhlenberg County. And I found, also in Miss Onslow County history, I had found a deed for James Edens that had a curious clause in it. When he bought a piece of land, it said that the original owner, the previous owner, reserved the right to box the pine trees for turpentine. And when he sold the land, it said the same thing, that the man that James Edens bought the land from still had the rights to the pine trees. And this history made me understand what that was all about. There were extensive pine forests in Onslow County, and one of the big industries there was the making of turpentine, tar, and pitch. So there's some things that I can understand from now that I know about this, what this clause means. And I think the fact that James Edens let the previous owner have the rights to the pine trees meant that he was not in the turpentine business. He bought the land for farming. So see how you can figure out things reading between the lines. I found a wonderful history of Muhlenberg County that was long out of print, published in 1913. And I could find used copies for $200 to $300. But I found a CD of it for a whole lot less money. And even though this wasn't published in 1913, the man who'd been accumulating information for many, many years had talked to old-timers. He had found things like a store ledger that had covered the period of 1813 to 1815, which was when my ancestors were living there. That was really fascinating. And he talked about what wild animals were there and how abundant they were and how awful the roads were and how people couldn't get to the county seat much of the year because the roads were so bad. And he talked about the militia musters and all those kinds of things. It was a wonderful book. I also found some master's theses that helped me. There is no published history on Grace County, Kentucky, but I found a thesis that was written in 1960 at the University of Kentucky. I also found theses on history of education in Muhlenberg County and Grace County, Kentucky, that were also done at the University of Kentucky in 1928 and 1931. And I found two theses on the history of the Jackson Purchase. Also, I found a lot of periodical articles that were useful. One of the ones I found was Methodist Bishop Francis Asbury traveled in the Trans-Appalachian frontier, and he kept journals of his accounts. And I found an excerpt from one of his journals in a periodical that described he saw people who were traveling, who were migrating west from North Carolina into Tennessee. And he said this road that they were traveling on was probably the worst road in the country. And this was an eyewitness account from 1803, which was 4 years before my ancestors probably traveled the same road, and probably the road wasn't any better. I also found there are no newspapers for the early days in western Kentucky, but I found newspapers in the more established states, counties to the east, that had information about the purchase of land and the Jackson Purchase, and had ads. When the state sold the land, had ads for the sale. And another thing that I used was the Census Bureau compendiums. I think they're all online now, but they're the big fat volumes at the Sue's Little Library that I used. And how I used them was from 1830 to 1860, I was able to track the growth of Grace County, where I was born. It would tell what the population was in all those years. It would tell me how many churches were there, how many schools were there, so you could see the progress of the county over that period of time. Can anybody think of So these are some of the sources that I use. Can you think of any other things that might be useful? It's not easy to find some of these things, and it's a lot of hard work. But you can really fill in the gaps in what you know about people by using these sources. Yes?
There's two things. How do you recommend message boards? Online message boards? So I have a recommendation for those.
Okay, go ahead and tell us.
It's just that if you do post something on a message board, don't be changing your emails.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
So don't change your email. People are always email hopping, changing their emails. If you have a message posted on a website, on a genealogy website, just keep your email the same. Because I have posted, and it's been 3-4 years before I've gotten a response back. The responses I've gotten are so rich. Now I have tried to find people that are on there.
Yes,
they're
it's
always
frustrating
gone.
if they was on, yeah.
And then the other is the digitized newspapers. And they are so wonderful because they will have the pensions. They'll have pensioners listed, and they will also have who has mail at the post office. They didn't have delivery back then. And the 18th century, the 19th century newspapers are now on Heritage Quest as well.
Yeah, the Library of Congress is also digitizing some historic 19th century newspapers. They call it a Chronicling America. They don't have a lot yet, but stay tuned. There's lots of newspaper sites out there. Newspapers are really wonderful. I mean, I challenge you to read a newspaper and only look for your family. That's impossible. There's so much interesting stuff in newspapers. Yes.
I once did, in my first national park job, I was asked to do research about someone who might have been in the 1890s or 1880s from the University of Chicago, and then ultimately lived in the wilds of what later became a national park. And in my naivete, I looked up, I went to all the local libraries and historical societies and looked up every newspaper, anything that was written in that era and that time. And then I decided to try and use the telephone book and telephone record, long distance records, to call up to see if anyone was alive who was ever mentioned in any of those articles. And then I also found out whether any of the journalists were still alive. And I interviewed those people too. Someone over there, a librarian, said, I didn't know her husband was one of the journalists, said, have you ever done oral history? You need to get to this and that. Since then, I studied that at the university. But I was able to do so much research about that woman that, unbeknownst to me, there was a professor in the audience who had been doing research on her for 20 years and assigning her life as a creative writing topic.
Oh, wow.
And he had to come and talk to his classes twice because I had gained so much more information in his 20 years worth of research.
Have any of you taken the oral history class at the Museum of History and Industry? Yeah, okay.
So she gave Lorraine
Lorraine taught it, yeah, right.
Well, she taught it here, so there's a lot of us.
Oh, she taught it here, yeah.
She's like her cousin.
Oh, okay. Oh, Lorraine's wonderful. Any other comments or questions? Yes.
I have kind of a strange question. I stumbled upon a cemetery in northern Indiana that had my ancestors from the 1700s. And there was fresh flowers on all the graves. So I know there's somebody living back there. But I'm trying to check. It's easier to find the people that have passed on than it is to find the living.
Yeah.
So what is the best way of finding the living? Is there a certain, I checked on, like white pages and yellow pages and email pages, and they don't have emails.
I don't have any better suggestions on that, except in a very small town, you might be able to write to some official in that town or the library in that town and say, do you know anybody working on this family?
Like the sheriff's office.
Yeah, right. I know some people had luck like that.
The Florida shop. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you have to think outside the box.